Welcome to the Time to Practice podcast. This is a space where we talk about music practice, the ups and downs that young musicians go through related to practice and learning music, and how we as parents, caregivers, and music educators can support the young musicians in our lives, support ourselves, and support each other. My name is Christine Goodner. I'm a music educator, author, and podcaster who has made it my mission to talk about music practice and to support educators and families looking to make home practice more effective and to reduce conflict and frustration in the practice room. I'm so glad you're here. This episode is brought to you by my Suzuki licensed book, Beyond the Music Lesson. This is a book I wrote when I wished there was a book I could give families to read after Suzuki's Nurtured by Love to help make Suzuki lessons and practice and the whole process work in our modern lives. It's meant to be an easy read and to help families get started on their journey supporting their child's music lessons and to help set them up for success. You can find a copy at bookshop.org, barnesandnoble.com, Amazon.com, Audible, or you can order bulk copies through my website if you want to order a set for families in your program. So this is a resource that I really wish I had when I started practicing with my own kids, and I'm excited for you to get a chance to read it too. Today, I want to tackle a topic I'm hearing a lot about this time of year from my own students and from families when I give workshops and talks as well. And a common theme I hear from parents is related to the question, what is the hardest or most challenging part of home practice right now? And I do like asking this question because I like to hear what's going on with families I work with so that I can try to be as helpful as possible. And the most common answer I hear is the hardest part is getting started. Or things like, once we get going, my child is just fine, but they really fight it at the start of each practice. Or getting the instrument out of the case seems to be the hardest part for us. And upon reflection, while it's hard to get started, it looks different for me than when parents describe it about their young children. Even when I want to have practiced or exercised or have recorded this week's podcast, for example, sometimes the transition into something that's going to take effort and intense focus and being able to set aside everything else I'm thinking about and interested in can be really challenging, even for me. I can find myself dragging my feet, internally complaining to myself. And at the same time, I can see the time going by and start to feel some anxiety or worry that I'm using up all my allotted time for what I need to get done, just in the quote, getting started part of what it is that I'm doing. And I know this is not just a personal quirk of mine. It is an executive functioning task to switch from one thing to another, and it is only human if we are doing something we're interested in and enjoying that it is hard to put that aside and start doing something else, especially something else that requires deep focus. So I want to share a few things that other people have had to say about this task switching or getting started or task initiation with you today, and then we'll talk about some thoughts about applying this to music practice. So I saw a great quote in an article by Susan Donahoe, who is a pediatric OT. And she has a company that has compression wear for students with sensory needs. And I will link to her article in the show notes. But I'm going to read this quote from her article that I thought sums this challenge up nicely. Transitions are a brain-based process that is still developing in children. Transitions can be difficult for any child, but especially challenging for those with neurological, developmental, and learning difficulties. Countless times a day, a child needs to make small transitions requiring flexible thinking and other executive functioning skills. And I love that way of summing up why this could be challenging because it feels like getting started is just like a motivation thing. But there's a lot of executive functioning skills which neurotypical children are going to develop fully in their late teens, early 20s. They're in process developing for many of our children. Many of you listening to this podcast who practice with your kids are still developing those flexible thinking and executive function skills that help us more easily switch from task to task. So I like that way of summing it up, that this is a brain-based process that is still developing in our children. I think that sums this up nicely. There's also a great article from Catherine Martinelli in the Child Mind Institute's website that I'm going to share a link to in the show notes as well. And in this article, The author really talks about how if we can understand where the challenge with this transition is coming from in our children, sometimes it helps us as the grown-ups to figure out, how do I help my child solve this problem? Because we are talking about why it's so hard to get started, but also if we're looking for solutions, the specific why for our child can be really helpful to understand. Even though all children might struggle with transitions, it could be really different what it is for our child that is specifically challenging. So, students with ADHD, anxiety, autism, and sensory processing issues can find transitions particularly difficult, Catherine Martinelli writes. And I think that's really important to keep in mind that sometimes our child has a specific challenge with getting started that they are going to need our support with in a different way than we might hear other people talk about their child needing support with. And that is just fine. I think the beauty of supporting our child in their music journey is that we get to know our specific child and their specific strengths, their specific areas of support they're going to need from us, and that we get to help them be set up for success and to do this well. And the transition into practice can be a really important way that we can help support our children to get their music practice accomplished. So I think thinking about what is it that could be challenging for our particular child. This article had some great ideas specifically for ADHD, anxiety, autism, and sensory processing. There was little headings with specific advice. So rather than recap the whole article here for you, I will put a link to that in the show notes. If you're having trouble finding show notes, send me a message and I am happy to help you get a link to this article. I think it's really helpful, and it's really helpful to understand why our child might be having a specific challenge with getting started that might look different than someone else we talked to in group class or at recital, for example. And then a third article that I want to share with you is from Psychology Today. And it really talks about how sometimes the transition into music practice or into an activity that our child really wants to do, but gets a lot of resistance to starting, could really be an issue of overwhelm. In this article, licensed clinical social worker Claire Lerner talks about why transitions are so hard for some children. And especially, and this goes for all students, I think this really sums up why it's hard, is that switching from our like mental and emotional and physical energy from one thing we're doing to another takes a lot of work for all of us, but we are sort of used to it as adults. Our brains kind of do this. We've got some systems in place and we've got a lot of practice at it, but our children are still developing that skill, and it can lead to a lot of overwhelm to have to take all the energy and enthusiasm and focus and mental, emotional, physical energy that we're putting towards one activity that we're doing, and then having to switch all of that into a new context, into a new area, which in this case we're talking about would be our music practice. That is legitimately hard for a lot of children, and that overwhelm can be what we're seeing that looks like resistance, refusing to get started, trouble transitioning into practice. So in the article, the author talks a lot about some strategies that we can use are having conversations to understand, what our child is feeling if they're, at an age and if they're willing to have those conversations with us. Having a transition ritual. I'm going to talk about a couple ideas for that in a couple minutes here. And then ultimately validating the fact that, okay, you really don't want to get started on this thing. You're really having a hard time going from this thing you're doing to the music practice in this case. And if we validate that experience for our child. And then also, she recommends just having these activities be a non negotiable. So, if our child feels like maybe they could talk us out of doing them on any given day, that is when we might get more and more of the debates about getting started with practice. If it's like, I hear that you don't want to do this, we are going to get it done. Let me help you get started. That is ultimately what will help our children adapt and adjust, Clara Lerner says. And she really addresses in this article how confusing it can be to parents when their child really wants to do an activity. Like, I really want to play the violin or the piano or the guitar or the flute. But then every time it's time to practice, they really, really don't want to do the practice. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but one of them can just be that this transition is hard and they need some help navigating it. And so in this case, she says that if you can see your child ultimately wants to do the activity and ultimately the activity is really good for your child, which I would argue music learning definitely is, then it's okay to treat this as a non-negotiable. Like, while we're taking lessons, we will practice. Let me help you get started because I see that you're feeling like it's hard and you're, allowed to feel like it's hard. So I thought that was great advice. So those are three experts giving their thoughts and advice from a few different articles that I, again, will share with you the link, and let me know if you're having trouble finding that. I will send it to you directly. And just kind of sum those up, transitions are hard for many kids. I would say they're also hard for teens and adults. We just know how to navigate them. Writers will talk about writer's block. And sometimes I think that is the transition into the deep work of writing for the day. And this is just something that can be tricky. It's hard to change context. It's hard to get into deep focused work. And I think, especially if we're transitioning from something that we are really enjoying doing and maybe something that feels a little easier to do than our music practice, that can be especially hard to get all that energy of, oh, this feels kind of easy and fun. I'm in the flow, even if it also feels hard. I'm just like really into what I'm doing. And now I have to stop all that and end it and put all my energy into this new thing that can really feel frustrating for a lot of our students. So I think having some empathy for that, not an excuse or a reason not to practice, but just, oh, this is why my child's having a hard time with it. And, of course, as adults, our brains are developed, our executive function skills are developed, and we have experience that tells us, okay, it's hard for me to start this right now, but it's going to be worth it in the end. And so I'm going to push through and do it. I think we develop that muscle through encountering things like our music practice, for example, and having worked through that over and over, we realize, okay, this will feel good once I get it done. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we have the opportunity to help our children, help coach our students through this so that they can develop that muscle too and that feeling as well. Practicing an instrument and coming to it each day, despite how excited we happen to be about it on that particular day as far as getting started, and then discovering, oh, that wasn't so bad, or that's getting easier, or actually today I'm looking forward to it, even if, yesterday or tomorrow feels hard to get started, is how one develops this perspective. And research tells us executive function skills like task initiation or task switching do get strengthened with practice and repetition. It can be helpful to remember that. Sometimes we are practicing how to get started, how to switch from one task to another, and maybe how to switch from something that's fun and easy to do or super engaging to something that takes more deep and focused work and that we want to do, but it might be really hard to get started on. So, if transitions into practice are a real challenge, your child may need an on ramp to practice. If we're driving down the highway and our exit is coming up to get home or wherever we're going, there is often an off ramp that gets us from the highway and the fast speed we're traveling and gets us sort of off to a side street, helps us slow down, helps us merge into traffic and getting us to our destination. And I think switching tasks for practice can really need its own kind of exit ramp and on ramp into the practice space. I have heard the advice a few different places over the summer to give a buffer of 10 plus minutes from fun, engaging screen time. Not really talking about writing an essay on a screen, but online games, etc., and having a buffer between that and starting practice because we're going from a really rewarding activity to one that takes a lot of work and a lot of deep focus. I think that is one way we can help our kids transition into practice. Setting a timer with a 10-minute and maybe 5-minute and even 1-minute warning going off, reminding us that we're going to get started, helping our child mentally shift gears and know that practice is coming can also be very helpful. Our frequent guest on the podcast, Barbie Wong, shared recently with me that she has her students gives them 2 minutes sometimes at the beginning of practice with a sand timer, and they can just play whatever they want first, and then they get into the work part of playing. And I think that could be a great way too for some students. Getting to play something they love can help them have that on ramp into being willing to focus on the more structured practice assignments they have from their teacher. Few other ideas that I have had work with my students or heard other people share is starting with rhythm games and activities or note reading. If a student really likes doing that and it feels like a nice way to ease into practice. Also, starting with listening and putting on a piece of music our child is working on or a piece of music being played on the instrument they're learning. That can be a nice way to get our brains into music mode. Please don't be discouraged if starting is hard. It doesn't mean your child doesn't like their instrument or they shouldn't continue with music. Chances are, if you ask a handful of musicians you know, if it's ever hard for them to transition from other things they like to do in life into their practice, many of them also feel it too. Still, it's part of being human, especially the kind of human that gets deeply immersed in anything they are doing. struggles with sustained attention, or whose brains and executive function skills are still developing or need ongoing support. Start with something your child's excited about, start with review, start with note reading, whatever it is that feels neutral or less intense, in order to give that on-ramp into the practice and help our brains get into music or practicing mode, as we call it in my studio. You may have to experiment and get creative with what that thing is that helps your child get started at this point in their musical and human development. Could you help your child unpack their case if that's the sticking point? Could you help your teen learn to set alarms for practice on their phone? Could you brainstorm with them ideas that might help them ease into practice? You could ask other parents you know whose kids practice if they've ever struggled with getting started, and if so, what solutions they found that work for their child. Those same solutions might not work for your child, but they may be worth giving a try. I'd love to hear what works for you in music practice and getting started in your house, whether you are someone who practices with young children, whether you're a musician yourself who has to get creative about your own transition rituals into practice. You can reach out to me, Christine, at SuzukiTriangle.com, or reach out to me on Instagram at SuzukiTriangle. And I also want to let you know before we go today, by popular demand, I have started a YouTube channel as another way to listen to the podcast. I don't have plans right now to do a video podcast at this point, so there's going to be probably a static image of our artwork for the podcast up there. But if that's how you consume podcasts, you can find the Time to Practice podcast there, and I will put a link to find it in the show notes. But if you look up the handle at Time to Practice Pod, you should find the show. And if you watch or listen to this podcast there, you can definitely put a comment in the comment section and share what gets you started in practice. Getting started can be the hardest part of practice sometimes. We are all in that together, I think, and it's really helpful to share ideas with people, in your own studio, in real life, that you talk to about practice, what helps your child get started, and to keep thinking about if something switches and suddenly it's hard to get started again, okay, what new ideas can we add? I hope this episode gave you some ideas to get going with that this week. So with that, Time to Practice community, I want to wish you a very happy week of practicing. Take very good care.